Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me. My name is Tom Seaman, and today's program is called Living Well with Dystonia. I want to share with you my program goals. I would love to educate you about the many aspects of life with dystonia. Many people think that it's just a physical condition, but it goes much further beyond just physical, as I will get into. I hope to inspire and motivate you how to live well with dystonia. I want to share with you tools that you can put to use immediately. I want to provide you with hope to ease any kind of suffering you are experiencing on your personal journey with dystonia. Ultimately, my goal is for everyone to walk away from today's presentation with something that changes your life in a positive way. I have a program disclaimer that I want to also share with you. Each and every one of us is at a different point in our journey with dystonia, and so how we process dystonia, as well as all other life experiences, is very different from person to person. So I know that we are all at a different point with our particular condition, and the specifics of what we're going through in our lives is all very different. And so not everything I'm going to share in this program will be applicable to everyone. And I say that because it took me a long time to find my bearings before I was even willing to listen to, let alone try and understand some of what I'm going to be sharing today. I'm really hoping that what I do share will touch all of you in a way that, again, as I said before, changes your life in a positive way. But I understand that this is a very difficult condition to live with, especially if you are newly diagnosed. And as for me, I had to wait for my world to stop spinning before I could take the steps necessary to begin the healing journey, which is a journey that I'm still on. I am not free of dystonia. I look very different now than I did when my symptoms were more severe on the outside, but as many of us know, we experience many symptoms on the inside that are not visible. And so my outward appearance does not necessarily reflect all the symptoms I'm experiencing on the inside, which I will cover some more in upcoming slides. But I just want to put this in here because I do understand that each and every one of us is at a different point, and I'll share with you a quick story about me early on when my symptoms were really severe. I was at Easter with my family, and I ran into my uncle who was involved with insurance sales, and he was on the road and he met a client who happened to have dystonia. And this gentleman had learned how to live well with it, and he learned how to manage his symptoms and cope pretty well. And so my uncle thought he'd be a helpful resource for me. So at Easter, he gave me his phone number. But I did not call this gentleman because I was at a point where I didn't even know what to say to people. I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know what to do. And I was at a point where, and this may sound a little dramatic, but this is the truth. I was at a point when he gave me his number where I either wanted to die or I wanted to absolutely not live with dystonia at all. So I did not want to learn how to live well with something that I viewed as this absolute evil intruder that totally took my life away. So I didn't want to call this person because I was really afraid. And a few months later, I ran into my uncle again, and he asked me how the conversation went, and I told him, well, I never called. And we're going back about 18 years now, and I don't recall how the conversation went, but I remember him being angry and disappointed with me that I didn't take up this opportunity to speak with him. And I didn't have the words back then to explain to my uncle that I just wasn't ready for it. And so I completely understand for some people who are listening to this program that some of this information may come to you in a way that is difficult to process. And hopefully that is not the case, but I just want to share with you that that is a possibility. So let's just begin with some very basics about dystonia. A lot of us already know what this information is, but I just want to get a foundation for the program before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of it. So what is dystonia? Dystonia is a neurological movement disorder characterized by uncontrollable involuntary muscle spasms and contractions, which causes repetitive movements, twisting, and/or abnormal postures. Basically, it's a co-contraction of opposing muscles. Many of you may have seen a video that I did that's on YouTube. It's called What is Dystonia and What Does It Feel Like? And in that video, I give a variety of different examples to try and help explain how dystonia feels. And the one that I use the most, that I find to be the easiest to explain to people, is the contraction of our bicep muscle. And so what you do is you basically flex your bicep, and at the same time you're flexing your bicep muscle, try and extend your arm. And it's impossible to do this because the bicep muscle must relax in order for the tricep muscle to engage to extend the arm. So contracting the bicep brings your fist closer to your body, and extending your arm is when you contract your tricep. And if you are contracting both at the same time, your your arm stays locked in position and actually may begin to shake. And if you haven't tried this, go ahead and try this. And maybe this may be how some of your symptoms feel. So basically what's happening, the bicep and the tricep are opposing muscles, and there are opposing muscles all throughout the body. And so with many of our dystonic muscles, we have a co-contraction going on, which does not allow for that area that's affected to relax. Now, those muscle tractions I was discussing, they can be sustained, which means that they are locked in position, or intermittent, where they contract and then relax, and then contract and then relax. And in some cases, it may also include a tremor. It can cause varying degrees of severity, and there are absolutely no two exact cases of dystonia. There are some people who may look highly symptomatic, while there are some that show no changes at all in their physical appearance, neither of which is a sign of the pain a person feels on the inside or other symptoms they feel on the inside. As I shared in the beginning, my symptoms now are not nearly as visible as they once were, and so the assumption that many people have is that I am cured and that I no longer experience the symptoms of dystonia, which is not true at all, because I feel all of the muscle tension on the inside. I feel like I'm being strangled at times. I feel like my body is a corkscrew. I have involuntary spasms and contractions and pain. And so you just don't see them. So the people looking at me assume that everything's okay because they can't see the symptoms. But there's also different movements I can do where my symptoms would actually be quite visible. This is very important because a lot of people don't understand, if we don't show symptoms, and there are a lot of us out there, that we have something, that we're making this up, that we're sympathy seeking or something along those lines, which is not true at all. In fact, I know some people who look very, very symptomatic, who experience no pain whatsoever. And then there are some people I know who don't look symptomatic at all, yet they experience tremendous amount of pain. And of course, many people in between those two extremes. And so how a person looks is not an indication of how someone feels. Dystonia is the third most common movement disorder after Parkinson's disease and essential tremor. There are lots of estimates out there. I've seen anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000 in North America alone, and over 1 million worldwide. I've heard statistics that there's 1 million in North America. I recently heard something about 1 million being in Europe. And so how many are really affected is not well known. However, it is more common than Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS, muscular dystrophy, and Huntington's disease combined. Now, these are 3 conditions that are very well known, yet they don't affect nearly as many people as dystonia combined, which says quite a lot. There are many forms of dystonia that affect any part of the body. The form that I have is called cervical dystonia, which is a focal dystonia, and focal refers to dystonia being localized to one part of the one body part or region. And so for me, it affects my neck and my shoulders and my upper back, but I feel it in other parts of my body as well. But where the dystonic activity is occurring is in my neck. And there are some people who have multifocal, where it affects unrelated parts of the body. So it could be the neck and the foot, it could be the neck and the arm, and it could be the arm and the leg. And there's other forms as well. There's generalized dystonia, where it affects the entire body. There's something called dysphonia, which affects the vocal cords. There's musician's dystonia. There are many, many other forms of dystonia that I'm not going to go into right now. I don't have the time to do this. And it is not just one area of the body that can be affected. There are many, many forms, and how they manifest are different in everyone. Now, for me, because I have cervical dystonia, I want to share with you some of the manifestations of the different forms. A lot of people actually have a combination of these different forms of dystonia. I happen to have a combination of anterocollis and retrocollis, the top two. But there may be people who have two or even more combinations of cervical dystonia. So what is a typical path to diagnosis? Now, the onset of symptoms, they can be immediate or slow. Again, it differs from person to person. For me, it was slow and it was a gradual experience. And for a lot of people, that tends to be how it is. However, you can wake up one morning and boom, your symptoms are super, super severe. Or you can wake up with minor symptoms and they can then progress over a period of time. That was the case for me, which I will go into in upcoming slides. After the onset of symptoms, we usually seek help from a doctor. And that depends on the kind of doctor you think that might help you if you don't know that you have dystonia. The first person I saw was a chiropractor because I thought that I had a musculoskeletal issue, and that's the kind of doctor I felt would probably be most helpful for that particular case. And I'll get into that a little bit more detail as well. On average, though, it takes 3 to 5 doctors and 3 years before being diagnosed. However, many people see upwards of 10 doctors and go much longer than 3 years to get properly diagnosed, and many eventually do self-diagnose. I know lots of people who have gone to many more than 3 to 5 doctors. I went to about 15 doctors, but thankfully for me, it was less than a year before being diagnosed. But I know people that actually have gone upwards of 20 years before being diagnosed. This particular information comes from a paper that was published in the Journal of Neurological Science. Our next step is typically to find a specialist for an accurate diagnosis, which is typically a neurologist specializing in movement disorders. They're typically called, they are called movement disorder specialists. MDS is their abbreviation. And then step 4, we begin appropriate treatments. And treatments vary widely, just as our symptoms vary widely. And so it may take a lot of trial and error to find what helps you most. And this requires a lot of patience on our part. And oftentimes it takes more than just one thing to really find a way to put a dent into our symptoms. And again, I'm going to go into all this in more detail in upcoming slides. So my medical path to diagnosis, as you can see, there's 10 different disciplines of medicine on this list here, and I saw multiple people in these particular disciplines. So I saw multiple chiropractors, MDs, physical therapists, and neurologists, and I actually saw several neurologists who did not even know what I had was dystonia. It wasn't until I went to a neurologist that specializes in movement disorders did they know that it was actually dystonia. But I saw physician's assistants, an internist, sports medicine, nurses, massage therapists, acupuncturists, and no one knew what was wrong. A lot of them thought they did, and they tried to help me, but some of them actually made me worse, much worse in some cases. Eventually, thanks to the internet, and this goes back to 2001 when I was diagnosed. That's when I was searching the internet, trying to find the information necessary, and I came across cervical dystonia, and it was a self-diagnosis, and then it was confirmed by a neurologist. So my dystonia symptoms began in August, actually it was more around July of 2001. I noticed a very minor, super minor tightness in my neck. I had some restricted movement, especially turning my neck to the left. And I'm going to show you some pictures of my symptoms in a moment. I had some minor restrictions, and I noticed a very slight head tilt, especially when I was driving and sitting. At the time, I was going through a major life change. I had left college and I worked in business for about 6 or 7 years. And then I decided I want to go back to college to get my master's degree in counseling. And I was going to a school that was about 4 to 5 hours away from where I lived. And so I was working about 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. And when I wasn't working, I was moving into my apartment at the college. And so I was noticing as I was driving that my head just sort of slightly seemed off center, and I would pull the rearview mirror down and try and look, and I couldn't really tell. But when I stood or I sat in front of a mirror directly in front of me, I could see that it was just slightly off center. And then this was an interesting thing here. My neck muscles began to feel very weak, which is ironic because in dystonia the neck muscles tend to feel really strong, but for me early on they felt really weak. I was not able to hold my head up. And so whenever I moved, especially when I was walking, my head would flop to the right with one step, and then it would pop back to center, and then it would flop to the right, and then back to center, and back to the right and to center, and it was very uncomfortable. I wasn't experiencing any pain, but it was uncomfortable because it was so different, and I thought everybody was just staring at me. And then I noticed when I was sitting, I had to prop my head or my chin in my hand in order to hold my head up because it was beginning to flop as well when I was sitting. Now this then progressed over the next couple of months to where my head was constantly pulling because the muscle contractions in my neck were so strong that I had no control over keeping my neck in on center, and I eventually was locked in position, turned and looking towards the right. The pain for me set in about 4 months after my first symptoms, maybe a little bit earlier. I forget the exact time frame. The muscle spasms and contractions, as I was mentioning, and the head pulling and the pain became too severe for me to sit or stand for probably more than 10 or 15 minutes. So I literally spent my entire day laying on the floor. I was basically bedridden come January 2002. So onset of symptoms began July 2001, 2000, or rather July, August 2001, and then by January 2002, I was just incapable of doing pretty much anything because it was just so painful beyond anything I've ever experienced in my life. And I've gone through many injuries and other sorts of pain conditions, and there was nothing in the world that I've ever experienced as bad as this. And so I was basically bedridden. As I mentioned, I self-diagnosed, and that was later confirmed by a neurologist in January, February 2002. So what is the general life impact of dystonia? Relationships, work, social connections, and everyday activities may be affected. We experience a lot of embarrassment, which leads to isolation as well as anxiety and depression. These are very common for many people to experience. The pain and the spasms and the other symptoms, they can disrupt sleep, and as I mentioned, they can hinder many, if not all, of our activities. Because of this, we may avoid social situations or feel uneasy around new people and in public. I completely isolated myself because I was so filled with just absolute shame and depression and anxiety, and it just hit me out of the blue, and it turned my world completely upside down. Many of us feel extremely misunderstood because this is a condition that is not well known, and even when we educate people about it, it's still difficult to really kind of comprehend what it's like. So it's very uncomfortable to be misunderstood, especially by those who are closest to us. So a lot of us experience much shame, anger, and as I mentioned, depression. And sometimes we are shamed by other people. We may feel internal shame because of a variety of different things, just because we may not be able to do all the things we once were able to do. And but other people may shame us as if this is our fault, as if we've done something to bring this on, when it wasn't at all anything that we have done in most cases. And even some doctors have been known to shame us into thinking that either it's our fault or it's all in our head, that we're making it up, or they don't realize the gravity of the situation and how much it impacts our life. And many of us just say, well, just deal with it and get on with it. It's okay. I deal with pain also, and other, thoughtless comments that come from many people in our lives. And I'm going to go over those in more detail further into the program. So what was the impact of dystonia on my life? I, at the time, was going to graduate school. I had to drop out. I had to stop working. I was an intern at the Career Development Center. I could not continue with that. I also had some businesses on the side that I couldn't continue with either. And as I mentioned, I basically rolled around on the floor all day in pain. I lost all my money and my savings trying to figure out what was going on and getting all sorts of tests and things, much of which was not covered by insurance at the time. And so I basically lost everything, including a lot of my friends and some of my family, which was probably the most difficult for me. Thankfully, the good ones have hung around and they are still in my life, and I have met so many new people, many of whom have dystonia, and many of whom may be listening right now. And I'm so grateful for all of you for the support that you have given me over the years, and I hope to grow the relationships that we have. Because I was so disabled, I had to move back in with my parents. I was 30 years old, and it was very discouraging for me with my life right in front of me, and then bam, totally taken away. And here I am back with my parents, feeling like a high school kid with no money and no abilities to really do anything. Actually, less than a high school kid who actually could function. I couldn't physically function. And so I had to move in with them because I couldn't do anything without help. For me, it was just enough sometimes to get out of bed and have breakfast. That sometimes was my entire day. And then it was back to bed for the rest of the day. So it was very tough for me to survive. I experienced severe anxiety and depression to the point where I was terrified to leave the house. I had difficulty with anxiety to such an extent that when I had to go to the doctor, I had a family member or a friend drive me, and sometimes it was only a mile, sometimes even less down the road, because I was so riddled with anxiety and panic attacks that I was afraid to leave the house. I had a very sedentary, self-destructive lifestyle. I had a horrible diet. I medicated with alcohol, and within 5 years, I went from a very active, athletic person that weighed a normal weight of 190 pounds. I'm 6'2", almost 6'3", so that's about the weight that I should be. And I gained 150 pounds. I'm going to show you some pictures of how that looked in a little while. And so I looked like a very different person. I acted like a very different person, and I basically didn't recognize myself. And I wanted to get away from the world as much as I possibly could. I did not know how to cope. I did not know how to survive. I did not know what to do. In my mind, my life was basically over. That's how I felt at that time. So how did dystonia physically manifest in my life? So here's where I want to show you some images of how the dystonia looked. So this was back in, this was between a period of around 2002, I believe. And as you can see, my head was pulled to the right, and the image on the right, you can't see my hips, but they're actually shifted way over to one side, and my upper torso to the other side, and then my neck going to the other side. So I was kind of shaped a little bit like an S. And it was at some point, at some points it was primarily in my neck, but occasionally it would affect my entire body as well. Now these pictures really don't illustrate the severity of my symptoms, because when I moved they were much worse, to the point where my head would almost be touching my shoulder. And the pain I was experiencing was just, again, I don't know how to really describe it. Here are some other pictures. The one on the left, ironically, I had just gotten a treatment, and I felt like I was getting a little bit better, and so I had someone take a photograph of me to see how I looked, and I didn't realize the difference in my shoulders. And you can see my right shoulder is up about 4, maybe 5 inches higher than my than my left, and my head is, of course, leaning to the right. My head is not leaning all that severely in this picture compared to some of the other ones. Now, the picture on the right, my body was so rigid from my neck down to my arms and to my waist that I was having difficulty just peeling a banana to just make a fruit protein smoothie for breakfast. And the pain was just unbearable. And you can see, if you look closely, you can see the severe increased muscle tone and the muscle contractions in my shoulder and in my neck. During this time, all I wanted to do was spend some quality time with my family and my friends and be able to work so I could be independent and feel worthy. I did not feel worthy at all. And I'm here, this was 2002 at my nephew's, this is my nephew's birthday, and this is my nephew and niece who are with me. And I was trying to still maintain my life as best that I could, but my body was not really allowing me to. And so for a while, I kind of pushed through all of the pain and all the other symptoms to try and keep up with the world, but I simply wasn't able to. And I felt nothing close to worthy at all. This is a picture of me when I was actually back in college with my youngest niece, my oldest niece. She was my only niece at the time. And a bunch of years later, she came to stay with me after I developed dystonia. And that morning I woke up and she had this poem that she put on the refrigerator, which reads, "Sugar and spice, my Uncle Tom is nice. He has a bad neck, but oh, what the heck. It makes me sad to see him feel so bad. I hope he gets well fast and the pain won't last, and then we can play with him all day." I used to be the fun uncle, and then I got sick and I was not able to be the person that my nephews and nieces at a very young age remembered. Thankfully, over the years, I have learned a variety of ways to manage my symptoms, which I will get into in more detail in a moment, and I was able to see my nephews and nieces grow up. And the niece that wrote the poem is to my immediate left, and she's now 28 years old. And the rest of them are all in or out of college right now. So thankfully, I've been able to see them grow up and be a part of their lives. But let's go back in time a little bit to see how I got to where I am today. So back in 2001, I was very active with athletics. This is just showing two photographs of the many activities I did. So golf and baseball were two of my main sports, but I was involved with tennis, racquetball, karate. I lost my train of thought for a moment there. Bowling and all racket sports and running and as I said, traveling and business and working and just pretty much anything and everything. And I went from that to this person that could not do any of those things anymore. So it was extremely devastating for me to be living such a life that was so free to feeling completely imprisoned in my body. This is me at the ST Recovery Clinic in New Mexico. I'm sure some of you have heard of it and may have been there yourself or have utilized their program they call it the long distance program, where you can get their manual and CD program. These pictures were merely taken for demonstration purposes only. For me, when I was able to, when I reached the point where I was able to do weight work, I wanted to have pictures taken so I could see the proper technique for them. But as you can see, my neck was locked in position to the right, so I was experiencing extreme pain during this period of time. In fact, the entire time I was at the clinic for 4 days, I spent it on the floor just rolling around in pain. And as I mentioned, all I felt was intense pain, and I really can't put words to it. The best way that I can really describe it is if you can think of a moment in time when you have injured yourself, and the feeling that you had at the moment of injury where it takes your breath away. that is how I felt all the time. It was as if I was being injured over and over and over in the base of my neck, my shoulders, and my back. It felt like someone had a drill in the base of my skull, my neck, and my shoulders, while at the same time being hit with a hammer. Now, I don't know what those things feel like, but that is how I would expect those things to feel, because it was just absolutely devastating. So my day basically consisted of waking up, and I would make a very quick fruit and protein smoothie for breakfast. And the reason I had that is because, well, one, I found it to be very healthy, but two, it was the quickest thing that I could make, and it was hard for me to swallow, so having liquid was very, very helpful. I would then go lay on the floor in front of the TV and basically, like I said, roll around, holding my head, doing a lot of crying, a lot of yelling, a lot of just moaning and groaning, because it was just brutal. And I only got up from the floor to go to the bathroom or to get my next meal. And when I went and got food, I would bring the food from the plate to the floor, and I would lay on my side, and I would slide the food into my mouth. And then I would knock it up until I had to go to the bathroom again, and then I would just then I would clean my dishes, and then I'd be back on the floor. And then I would go to bed, and I would do it all over again the next day. And I lived like this for about 5 or 6 years. I felt, as I mentioned early on, I felt like my life was over. I got to the point where I did not care about anything at all anymore, and I really lost my will to live. And in this image, you can see all these words, and I felt pretty much all of them: unimportant, unwanted, shameful, helpless, hopeless, despicable, inferior, broken, alone, and useless. I felt all of those things every single day, and I know many of you may feel those as well. And I hope that I can, in the second half of this program, provide you with some information to get you out of this horrible place that many of us are living in. This is a quote that I never really thought about until I got sick. And it's so true how health brings a freedom that very few realize until they no longer have it. And when I lost it, I realized how much I took everything before developing dystonia for granted. I took pretty much everything. I was a very lucky person to be able to do as much as I was able to, and I took so much of that for granted. And I am working so hard now to be as grateful as I can for everything that I am able to do, as different as it is from my life prior to dystonia. I'm going to talk about that in some more detail in upcoming slides. So how did I cope with dystonia, pain, anxiety, and depression? Not very well, let's put it that way. I grieved a lot. I cried, I yelled, I retreated from the world, as I've mentioned before. I drank alcohol to medicate the mental and physical pain. And I want to just stop here for a moment, because I know that there are other people that have done this as well and do this. And I just want to just put the word out there that alcohol, for some, can be beneficial and help relieve some of your symptoms. But for many people, it can make it worse. But I just want to put out a word of caution that if we become too dependent on alcohol, we don't want to develop a problem with alcohol in addition to dystonia that we already have. And so I caution all of you to be very careful about your alcohol consumption. I also ate a horrible diet and gained 150 pounds. Basically, as melodramatic as this sounds, I wanted and I was waiting to basically die. I was merely existing. People would often tell me, well, at least dystonia isn't deadly. And you know what? Back then, I wished it actually was, because I wanted to die. And I know, again, this sounds melodramatic, but I felt like my life was over. And I thought about taking it, and thank God I did not. But I really, truly felt like I had nothing left, and I was pretty much done. So I merely just existed and did everything I could to try and avoid the pain that I was experiencing, both physical and emotional. So here's a photograph of me on my journey to weight gain, and of course, here I am holding a beer, which I was drinking a lot of to try and cope with the pain. And that smile you see on my face was hiding tremendous anxiety, depression, and physical pain behind it. And I'm going to show you the same picture blown up so you can sort of see how I looked in terms of my size compared to other people. My dystonia symptoms are somewhat visible here, but not all that much because the weight kind of hides it a bit, and I'm turning towards the camera, which is turning towards the way my neck wanted to turn or was turning involuntarily, so it looks a little more normal and natural than it would if it were straight on. This was my 33rd birthday, and I remember the day very, very well. And I did not want to be here. I had my entire family here along with some friends, and it was a very miserable, painful day. It was a day that we had awful weather at the same time, which contributed to some of what I was experiencing. And I was engaged in conversations that were fun, but they were always very difficult because talking for me was hard because I was always gasping for breath because the pain was always just, like I said, it was like being injured over and over and over again. And so I was always kind of gasping for breath when I was talking. And so it took a lot of energy for me to have a conversation, which nobody understood. And so I was very happy when this particular day was over. And again, you can see me here with a beer in my hand, which I had quite often to try and alleviate some of the pain. Fast forward another year to roughly around Christmas 2005, and at this point I was reaching a little over 300 pounds. I was close to about 330, 340 here. This is a photograph that was taken by my sister-in-law with my niece and my nephew behind me after they had given me a gift. And I didn't realize the picture was taken until I heard the click on the camera, and I was a little upset because I ran from the camera, and I often didn't look in the mirror because I was so ashamed at how I looked. So a month goes by, and it's my birthday. So January 24th, I get a visit from my niece and my nephew, and they gave me they gave me a birthday card along with this photograph. And I stood there what seemed like many minutes, and it may have been. Looking at this photograph, wondering why on earth would my niece and nephew give me a picture of them with some guy that I don't know. I did not know this was me. That's how bad it had become. I did not recognize myself anymore. And I'm throwing this in here because I want to show you how I look now in terms of my weight. This is a book that my brother recently wrote. It's called Weight Loss Secrets. And I'm on the cover of the book to illustrate me at 340 pounds and then me at 190 pounds, which I was able to keep off from 2007 on. Again, though, here's another picture of me from December of 2006, shortly before Christmas. And this is my youngest nephew sitting on my lap. And you can see how large I had become. You can't really see my dystonia symptoms all that much because I'm so large and they're kind of hidden. And during this time, my skin was pale yet very pinkish. I felt sick constantly. I was always sweating and very hot, so I was, even in the coldest temperatures, I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts. And I was just beyond embarrassed and miserable and full of just disdain for myself. And I look at this now and barely recognize this person. So fast forward to 2017 when this photograph was taken, and this is my same nephew. 11 years later, he's now a sophomore in college, and I tried to recreate the exact same picture with me and him in it, and I'll do it side by side here so you can see this ridiculously suffering person on the left-hand side compared to this other person who has done so many things to get to where I am now, to where I have a much more functional life, which I'm going to get into and share with you what it is that I am doing to help me manage my symptoms. But what was the turning point for me? What was it that took me from that person in the previous slide who was very overweight to that person who is now of normal weight? Basically what happened is about a week after that picture was taken, I came down with a stomach virus for about 10 days to 2 weeks, and it absolutely saved my life. So ironically, getting sick is what actually saved my life. So during that 2 week period, I was laying in bed saying to myself, okay, well, now what do I do? I couldn't drink, I couldn't eat, and I could barely move. And I was pretty much stuck in bed or in the bathroom. And I was alone with my thoughts. And I had many of them. And I basically was taking stock of my life. And I asked myself, this virus is going to end at some point, and you're going to be up and about moving around. And so, what are you going to do with your life? And this question absolutely terrified me because I did not know. And I knew that I had to face myself and my suffering, and I had to make life changes, but I did not want to face them, and I was just absolutely terrified. But I eventually got to the point where I said to myself, I'm going to make an effort at this. And I thought of this movie, as corny as this may sound, but I said to myself, Tom, you either get busy living or you get busy dying, because you right now, you are dying. And you need to either take care of yourself or just give up completely. And I decided that I wanted to live, and I wanted to try to make a life for myself. So what did I do? Very basic. This is more about just getting out of the starting where I was starting to lose weight and everything. I stopped my destructive lifestyle, which began with nutritional stuff. So I stopped drinking alcohol and soda. I stopped eating all the pizza I was eating and the fried food, sandwiches, chips, bread, grains, sugar, pasta, processed food. I got rid of all this stuff. And here's the ironic thing about this. Prior to developing Dystonia, one of the businesses that I was involved with was a nutrition business. So I knew what I should be eating, but I was so distraught that I went to that to comfort myself. I went to these awful foods to comfort myself. I also used to be a partner in part owner of a fitness center. And so for me to, I think that's what led to a lot of the shame that I was experiencing and the embarrassment, because here I was, this athletic, fit person who turned into someone that was having difficulty walking without losing my breath on blood pressure medication. I was weeks away from having a stroke or a heart attack. And so that was not the person that I have known all of my life. So I began to eat a modified paleo diet, which was fruits, vegetables, meat, lean meats, eggs, nuts, and fruit and protein smoothies, which is kind of my diet currently. It's not a diet for dystonia. It's a diet that I find to be helpful, that I enjoy eating for one, and I find to be very anti-inflammatory, which I find to be very important. Don't want to get into nutrition a whole lot here, but that was what I did. I changed my diet completely. I also began walking every day. Now, walking for me, it consisted of starting out from the front door of the house to the end of the driveway and back. That was the extent of how much I walked. I did that for a couple of weeks. And when I was doing it, I was very unstable. I had to have someone with me to hold me up. And I was shaking because I was so nervous to actually be out and moving, which is, again, very ironic for me because I was someone who was always on the move. I never, as a kid, up to my 30s, up to developing dystonia, I never sat around watching TV. I never played board games or anything inside. I was always outside unless the weather completely didn't permit me to go outside and run around and do nothing but play outdoors all the time, to someone who's extraordinarily sedentary. So for me to be uncomfortable just walking to the end of my driveway was just such a crazy mind bender for me. I also began doing the STRC, which is the Spasmodic Torticollis Recovery Clinic program. I began doing that, and I showed you some pictures earlier using the weights and everything. This program it's a natural program that consists of exercise, stretching, massage, pain tools, attitudinal work, lifestyle changes, that sort of thing. This was basically the foundation of how I began to improve my life. Now, I've added a lot of things to this. This is just one part of my symptom management protocol, but that's where I began. That was the beginning for me. I also really worked hard to calm my very anxious mind using meditation, prayer, progressive muscle relaxation, and breathing exercises. And people often ask me, what helps you most? And I'm going to go into the things that help me. But this right here is something that I think is an absolute necessity for me, I know, but I think for all of us to learn how to calm the mind. The mind and body connection is pretty powerful. It's extraordinarily powerful, actually. And if we can learn to calm our mind, however we go about doing that, I think it can have a tremendous impact on how well we feel. This is extremely critical for me, and I'm sure many of you as well. Otherwise, if we don't calm our minds, we are stuck in a stress response, or the fight or flight, or the fight, flight, freeze response, where our body is never at ease. And when we are not at ease, we are in dis-ease, and the body is not able to heal. So we need to learn to find ways to calm our mind down, because it will have a dramatic effect on how well our body functions. Because when we are in fight or flight, the mind, this is also called sympathetic dominance. So a mind that's constantly in fight or flight makes it near impossible for the body to heal, because it is never ever at peace. The reason why the working on calming our minds is because the mind-body connection, as I said, was so powerful, and suffering is far more than just physical. I want to share with you some excerpts from this amazing book. It's called Reversing Chronic Pain, written by Maggie Phillips. And she shares some information in here that discusses in chronic pain in a way that is really easy to understand, in a very fascinating way, actually. And she also includes a variety of different strategies for reducing to eliminating pain. As she shares, we don't just have physical pain, we agonize over painful memories, uncomfortable emotions, and difficult self-evaluations. When I read this, I can think of all the painful memories that I have thinking of the person I was before dystonia. As enjoyable as those memories were, they're painful because they're no longer who I am. And many of the things that I was able to do at one point, I can't do anymore. And so I agonized for years. I don't anymore, but I agonized for years over those memories of the life that I felt that I lost. In many ways, I did lose. Many uncomfortable emotions, as we all know, that come with living with dystonia. Basically, life in general come with many uncomfortable emotions. And we all are guilty of very difficult self-evaluations. We need to be careful about how hard we are on ourselves. We often worry about the emotional pain we experience, and we engage in all kinds of activities to avoid it, which is what I have certainly done. And I did for the first, 5 or 6 years living with this, when I was drinking and eating and avoiding people and anything and everything I possibly could to avoid it, when I was actually making it worse by doing all of these things. Which I think is a very important point to realize, is the more we isolate and remove ourselves from people and from the world, and we try to avoid it, the worse it becomes. But we have to be at a point where we are able to face it. And it took me 5 years, almost 6 years, before I was able to actually face it all. So if you are out there and you're reading this and you're hearing me talk and I'm saying, you need to face it, I don't mean right now if you're not ready. When you're ready, that's when you can work on it in the fashion that you find most helpful for you, which is different for all of us. When we suffer with anything, we don't just merely value feeling better. We value a productive life much more than simply a lack of suffering. We don't want to feel like we're just existing. And me, for so many years, and maybe some of you listening right now, you feel as though you are just existing and taking up space. And it's a very hard place to be. And if you feel this way, I really strongly encourage you to reach out to anyone at all who is willing to listen. And if you are not involved with different support groups for dystonia or chronic illness of any kind, I encourage you to get involved and see that you are absolutely 100% not alone. Now, the common denominator for people in pain is the longing for relief and a permanent end to pain. And we hold out hope for a magic bullet, which essentially is an all or nothing approach. And so, what that basically means is that we may try various treatments and therapies, and we hold out for that one thing that's just going to completely fix us. And when that doesn't happen, it can totally make our world spiral out of control, because when those hopes go unmet, we can be plunged into very deep depths of despair, which makes it difficult to remain optimistic. Because if nothing is working for us, then how can we be hopeful and optimistic that things are going to get better? Which is why we have to never really ever give up and always reach out for help, anywhere and everywhere, to get out of this mental hole that we can be in, which is so absolutely devastating, in my opinion, much more than just the physical aspects of living with dystonia or other health conditions. So we have to be very careful about our expectations. If we set them, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't expect to get results from particular treatments and therapies, but we need to be careful about how we set ourselves up emotionally for the outcome of those. We should be independent of the outcome and just allow for them to take place. And I want to share with you a brief story about me when I was going and seeing an acupuncturist. I went to acupuncture when I was able to get my dystonia symptoms under a little bit better control, and I'll go through that in a moment. I was experiencing, and I still do, severe pain in my mid-back, in my rhomboid muscle in particular, on the right side, which is where my dystonia is located. And I couldn't find anyone who was able to help me. And I was told to try out this acupuncturist in town. And I went to her, and she was absolutely amazing in helping me take away that pain. And I also noticed benefits of my mind relaxing, and I felt much more grounded. And so I was reaping many benefits. And I actually ended up going for about 5 years. I stopped going the last year and a half because when I laid down now, I have neck spasms and contractions and pulling. So it's hard for me to lay there and get an effective treatment. So I stopped going and doing that. Excuse me. But I want to share with you a story that happened when I was at one of my acupuncture treatments. I was reaping such great benefits from those treatments for a while that every time I went in, I was expecting the same results. And I mentioned this to the acupuncturist, and she said to me, you have to understand that I can't give you the exact same treatment every time because you are a completely different person every time you walk in my door. The moment you leave today, you are going to have new experiences, new exposure to new people, to various stressors, to highs and lows in your life. Your body's going to go through different things. You're going to have a different diet. You're going to process food and experiences and all things differently. And so the person that comes in for the next visit is different than the person who's here right now. So it's impossible for me to give you the exact same treatment and for you to have the exact same results. And so I encourage you, this is her speaking to me, I encourage you to please let go of the expectations and just allow yourself to be as mentally at ease as possible, not attached to the outcome of the treatment, and allow for the treatment to just take place. And when you can let go, it reduces the mental anxiety, which reduces the physical anxiety, which will hopefully give you a better result for your treatments. And then she shared with me this particular quote, that I began to recite every time I went into a treatment. And it's a quote from the Dalai Lama. It says, I am open to the guidance of synchronicity and do not let expectations hinder my path. I would recite this over and over as I was laying there to try and get out of my mind the thought of, oh no, she's putting a needle in a different spot, or she's doing something over here that's different from last time, and how am I going to feel? And I was trying to get my mental mental brain out of the way of the treatment that she was providing for me. And so this was very helpful for me. So I encourage you to just, have expectations, but be careful about the highs and lows of the emotions that you may experience based on the results of your particular treatment. Also, I think it's very important that we just recognize the fact that life is difficult. This actually is the very beginning of a book that I also think is a phenomenal book. I read this back in my late teens, and I've read it several times since then. It's from The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. In the very beginning says, once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because once it is accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. And this basically goes for life in general, not just dystonia, not just chronic pain, not just chronic illness, not just health issues. This goes for all of life. Life is tough. Let's just be honest. Life is tough. We have highs and lows and fun times and everything. And even people that we see out there who look like they're living their life, you know, living the life and having a ball and everything's just peaches and cream, they struggle as well. Everyone struggles. Life is tough. And if we can learn to accept that it is, then the suffering is not nearly as bad because it doesn't matter so much. And we learn to work with it versus work against it. And the more we resist this fact, the more pain and suffering we will experience, at least from my perspective. This is a poem that a good friend of mine wrote and sent to me years ago, and she allowed me to share it in this program. She also allowed me to publish it in my book. She didn't want her name attached to it. She just wanted it to be out there. And I think it really kind of sums up a lot of this in many ways. And I'm going to read it to you. How would you know to experience the true pleasures of life if you've never experienced the pain? Sorrow and suffering of any kind, in time, reveals an exquisite beauty, a secret that is meant to be found. Life is worth living. When you learn to embrace the pain and accept what is, that is when life will begin. Just when you think you can't take it anymore, when you are ready to give up, don't. That is when the change is about to arrive. If you feel your life has fallen apart, then rebuild from the ground up. That is the beauty in being broken. I think this really kind of speaks for itself, but I think the beginning really talks about the importance of pain and how that pain can actually help us really learn to appreciate the pleasures of life and how life really is worth living, and to just simply never give up. And just when you think that you can't take anymore, that's when change is going to arrive. This is a quote from my book. None of us are immune to the challenges of life. When adversity comes, how we respond to it determines what happens next. Life experiences become tragedies if we make the conscious decision to make tragedies out of them. If we choose to view all challenges as opportunities for personal growth, they can be a driving force for positive changes. We have to be careful about how we characterize life events and adversity. It can determine the path and the course of our life in dramatic ways. So here are some photographs of me showing my progression of symptoms from early on to this picture on the bottom right is actually from a couple years ago, but that's essentially how I look currently. So my neck is much straighter, and I've improved quite a bit, obviously. After all of this improvement took place, and again, I'm going to share with you coming up what it is that helps me most. I was hit with severe benzodiazepine withdrawal. I had worked my butt off to get my symptoms under better control, and since I had improved my symptoms so much, my doctors wanted to decrease my medications, which included Klonopin, Baclofen, and Restoril. They did it in a very rapid pace in very large amounts, and so I went into benzo withdrawal for 2 years to where I could barely function. Now, benzodiazepines, for those who don't know, they are a class of drugs that include things like Klonopin or clonazepam, Valium, Xanax, Restoril, Ativan, and many others, of course. So my benzo withdrawal symptoms, they consisted of my body basically was swaying back and forth. At least it felt like it was, as if my feet were stuck in cement and I couldn't move, but I was trying to get out and I was being swayed and pushed back and forth. I often felt like I was on a boat that was bobbing up and down in the ocean. Every step that I took felt like I was balancing on some kind of a slippery surface, like a wet rock in a stream or on ice. The floor looked like it was moving, as did the walls actually, and it felt like it was a soft cloud that I was walking on, and I was sinking into the ground as with every single step. My head felt like it was not attached to my body. It was almost like it was being pulled off. My skin felt like it was dripping off my bones, and when I looked at my arm or my legs, it looked like I was turning invisible. I had severe muscle weakness. I often wondered, how am I able to stand up right now? Because I felt as if I was so weak, it was as if I hadn't slept in months. That's how weak I physically felt. My arms and my legs they felt like they were the weight of telephone poles. I had severe vertigo. Any visual or auditory stimuli made all of my symptoms worse. I also had severe anxiety and depersonalization, all of which I've never ever experienced prior to going on these medications, all of which I never experienced prior to dystonia. It was hard for me to go anywhere. When I drove in my car, which was very, very little, or it was a passenger, I felt like I was floating on top of the car. I didn't feel like I even had my hands on the steering wheel. It was a terrifying experience. I had many other experiences as well. I don't have time to go into all of the anxiety and the severe panic attacks that I experienced, but it was rather intense to where I was absolutely terrified to leave my house. So in some ways, the benzo withdrawal, even though I was not experiencing physical pain back then, the benzo withdrawal symptoms were more severe than the worst pain I experienced with dystonia. And now, like I said, I wasn't experiencing physical pain during the withdrawal period because my body, I think, kind of shut down, and I was so weak that my dystonic muscles couldn't really contract the way that they wanted to. So I really just wasn't experiencing a whole lot of physical pain. But the other symptoms I mentioned were almost more devastating than what I experienced with dystonia. So I had reached a level of improvement, and then boom, I went straight down again to where I was bedridden, literally again, for another 2 years. So I had to pick myself up off the ground again. So as I said, it took nearly 2 years after we determined it was benzo withdrawal to get stabilized on my meds. And it took 2 years to determine that it was benzo withdrawal. And so it took 2 years to get me stabilized on my medications where I was able to function. And then once I did, I dedicated my life to being as healthy as I possibly could. Now, before continuing, I want to make it clear that medications are and they can be very helpful. And there are different medications for different people, so there's no one size fits all at all. And there's really no one size fits all with dystonia when it comes to anything. But if you're on these medications that have an addictive nature, like benzodiazepines do, if you ever decide to taper off them, please be very careful and do so with the guidance of a skilled and knowledgeable doctor in this area who will help you in a very responsible, slow taper process. So again, here are these images of me and the progression of my symptoms. I have many more, but these are the ones I put together here. So a lot of people will look at how I was, where my neck was turned and twisted and my shoulder was up, and then they see the picture in the bottom right and they say, well, what helps you most? What is it that you do? How are you able to manage your symptoms? And I have a very hard time answering that question because I do so many different things. And I'm going to share all those things with you. And I'm sorry it took so long for me to get to this point because I know I mentioned it several times prior. But I'm going to share with you the things that help me the most. And again, I don't know what thing helps me more than something else. It's very hard to really quantify a lot of it because I think there's a synergistic effect. And more than anything, it's the dedication to all of these things every single day. So they include medications, a very targeted stretching and exercise program, massage, acupuncture, which I don't do anymore, as I mentioned. Nutrition is very important for me, stress management, and topical analgesics, different salves, that kind of thing, and ice and heat, things that I use. I do these things every single day. Every single day I focus on those things. I've also learned to remove toxicity from my internal and external environment. So internal, of course, being like nutritionally. My external environment being the things that I expose my mind and my body to, be it people or environments or any kind of a surrounding that may trigger my symptoms. I'm also very mindful of what overstimulates my senses. I'm very sensitive to different sights, different sounds, different lights, different colors, repetitive noises and sounds and lights and lots of movement. And so I have to be very careful of avoiding those environments if possible, because they can ramp up my symptoms. And more than anything, they cause great fatigue than they do in terms of increasing my dystonia symptoms. I get pain and fatigue more than anything when my senses are overstimulated. I've also changed my lifestyle to fit the new me. And what I mean by that is I have to learn to accommodate my dystonia symptoms. For a long time, I tried to maintain the lifestyle that I was living prior to dystonia, trying to keep up with work, trying to keep up with school, trying to keep up with my social activities and traveling and whatever I was doing for business. And it was just making me worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I finally had to come to the realization that my body was not able to do what my mind wanted it to. So my mind was saying, go, 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 go. And my brain was saying, no, 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 no. And I finally had to listen to my brain and slow down and rearrange my lifestyle. I also stopped fighting against dystonia so much, which helped to reduce the mental angst that I had about it, which then helps me better accept me for who I am, no matter what is right or wrong. So again, this goes back to learning how to work with it, not fight against it, and accommodate my symptoms to fit the new lifestyle that I had to create for myself. Again, like I mentioned, I removed triggers from my life and I've added things that make me happy without allowing any guilt or judgment from others to alter the choices I make in my life. This is our life to live. And if you need to go and lay down at some point during the day because you're in pain and your symptoms are ramped up and you've got muscle spasms and your head or your neck or your whatever body part is affected is out of control, you need to remove yourself, by all means do so. If that requires sometimes half the day just doing nothing, if that's what you need, then that's what you need to go ahead and do your best to not allow other people to guilt you into being lazy, apathetic, and all these other labels that can be placed upon us. Be very careful about that. And for me, if I don't spend time in silence, and if I don't spend time laying down and using ice and heat and those kinds of things, I'm not very functional. It will impact me that day, but more so the next day if I don't take care of myself. And I have to maintain good balance in my life, and I have to be very careful about allowing the judgment from others to make me feel guilty about what I know I need to do in order to be as functional as possible. I've also found that a good attitude and a sense of humor is extremely important. And interestingly enough, about a sense of humor, um, the brain actually doesn't know the difference between real laughter and real smiles. And so we could actually reap the benefits of the production of things like serotonin and endorphins and dopamine by actually putting on a fake smile and a fake laugh, because the brain doesn't know the difference. And so laughter actually is very good medicine. I've also learned to let go of the things that I can no longer do because of my symptoms and fully embrace all those things that I can do now. Like I mentioned early on, I was a very active person in many, many sports. I was close to being a professional athlete in football and in baseball. And to go from someone like that to someone who is no longer able to do those activities, or rather, I choose not to because they hurt my body when I do, so I just choose not to. I can do them, but they bother me to the extent that it's not worth it for me. But I've had to let go of those things because they were those painful memories that I mentioned before that just caused depression. And so I could have gone 30 years, and again, 30. I was age 30 when I just developed dystonia, so that's why I'm using that time frame. I could have gone 30 years without being able to be involved in all of the activities that I was. And so I'm grateful for having been able to do them, and I've had to really work hard to say thank you for those times and now let them go and embrace who I am now, what I'm able to do, and get as passionate and enthusiastic about those things as I did all the things prior to dystonia. And that has been extraordinarily helpful for me to learn how to cope and learn how to reduce the mental anxiety and depression that I was experiencing for so many years by trying to hold on to a person that I no longer was, which allows me to embrace the person that I am now. And so, like I said, I've learned to be grateful for all the things that I was able to do and for what I'm able to do now. Again, we need to focus on now and not what once was. And I know how extraordinarily hard this is to do, and it is a process um, that is different for all of us. And I really encourage you to look at your abilities now, acknowledge the efforts that you make, and try and let go of yesterday, years ago, whatever it might be. Focus on right now and your life moving forward. And acknowledge every single effort made every day, no matter their size. I remember one day I was doing something, and I forget what it was, but it was like maybe 15 minutes of some sort of manual labor type of a thing. And after I was done, I was in so much pain, and my symptoms were ramped up, and I went and laid on ice for about an hour. And ice and heat, I lay down for about an hour, maybe 2 hours. And I was, for the first hour, just beating myself up because I was so angry that I was in so much pain and so much distress after only 15 minutes of an activity that I used to be able to do all day long. And then I said to myself, you know what? Just be proud of yourself that you can do that. Don't measure yourself. This is an extremely important point that I want to make for me, and hopefully this resonates with you. I had to stop measuring my life now after dystonia with my life before dystonia. So I measure myself now when I was at my worst with dystonia. Those images I showed you before, those pictures with my neck and everything, and the descriptions that I gave with the pain that I was experiencing, I don't experience anything to that extent anymore. And so I have to measure my progress from me at my worst point to where I am now. And when I do that, I realize that I am accomplishing a heck of a lot every single day. It's nowhere near what it once was prior to dystonia, but I can't measure myself and be healthy mentally to the person I was prior to dystonia. In order to be mentally healthy, I need to measure myself at my lowest point to where I am now. And I encourage you to please try and do the same. Helping others is also very, very helpful for a variety of reasons. It helps to take the focus off us and all of our problems and maybe give us some new perspective. Helping others also increases all those feel-good hormones, serotonin, dopamine, endorphin, and others. And there have been many studies done where they measure those hormones in the body in people who are doing a good deed, helping someone else, as well as a person receiving it. And what they've noticed is there's been an increase in those quote-unquote feel-good hormones in the person doing the good deed and the person on the receiving end. But more powerful, to me at least, than anything is that they measured levels of these hormones in people that were merely observing a kind act from someone from two other people that they weren't even involved in other than barely being the observer, and their feel-good hormones also increased. And so helping and being kind can really, really help. I've also learned to not look at myself as a victim, but as a student of dystonia or other challenges in life to learn life lessons. And this is probably one of the most difficult things. Because for years I felt that I was a victim. I felt like it was happening, dystonia was just ruining my life. But the problem, though, is that victim status, it embodies all that we reject about the struggles of life. So it's basically living in denial. And the challenge for all of us is to live and function well under all circumstances, including those never anticipated, like illness. I never anticipated getting sick and my life changing the way it had. And if I choose to be a victim, then I can't really survive and have a life that's worth living with meaning and purpose, which is extremely important. I also have a fantastic support system. I know that there are lots of people that don't have the same out there, and um, that's why I think it's important that we get involved with various support groups, and they're available on Facebook and other places online. There are also local support groups that you can get involved with as well. But that includes, for me, that support system includes my family, my friends, and I mentioned in-person and online support groups. These are my parents. They are my main support system. They absolutely, completely, 100% saved my life when I was at the absolute worst. In fact, they've saved my life many times over throughout my life and have always been there for me in many, many ways. I could spend hours on this slide talking about them, which if I spend too much time here, I will probably begin crying because of the impact they've had on my life and how meaningful they are to me. But they have been extraordinarily helpful for me. And if you have my book, if you look at the dedication, it's dedicated to my parents, and you can read in there exactly how it is that I feel about them. I also have my brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest of four, and my brothers and sisters are also extremely helpful and supportive of me. And again, this is a picture of my nephews and nieces. They have, as they've gotten older, they've come to better understand what it is that I'm going through. And it's been a pleasure for me to see them grow up and be a part of their lives. And so it's great to have them in my corner as well. This here is my sister again, and a cousin of ours. And this is a local support group. This is actually, ironically, this is or I should say, interestingly, this is a group for people with essential tremor, not dystonia. I went to this group because I have a friend that has essential tremor, and he was nervous about going, and I went with him along with another friend of mine who has dystonia. We went to the group to try and get him involved, and what turned out is that he didn't want to keep going. So he stopped going, and I continued going because I found that I found camaraderie with a lot of these people. And what was really cool is that even though they have a different condition, a different movement disorder, everything else that we experienced in our lives was and is exactly the same. So all of the non-physical symptoms and experiences that we go through were completely the same, so we could relate on every single level. And so if you don't have a dystonia support group in your area, look for a group for Parkinson's, essential tremor, chronic pain, chronic illness in general. Try and connect with people in your community if possible. This here is another very strong support link in my life. This is a guy named Fred. You can read about him in my book as well. He actually helped diagnose me with dystonia. He is in his 80s right now, and back in his 20s, he lived with a pretty bad case of dystonia. And when he first heard about my symptoms through my parents at a cocktail party many years ago, when they were talking about their families and things, they mentioned what I was going through, and Fred said, "That sounds a lot like what I had been going through. Here's my number. Have him give me a call." And I called him, we talked, and sure enough, he helped to diagnose me and get me on the right path. And so I owe a lot to this man. So what else helps me are various tools for pain and spasms. They include a Theracane, which is also called a shepherd's crook, and a back buddy, and there's other ones out there as well. Those are the three main ones. I'm sure many of you probably have this. I also use a massage machine. It's called Kneading Fingers. I have a Relaxamat, which is basically an acupressure mat. I use aromatherapy heat packs, ice packs, topical lotion, CBD oil. I don't use that much anymore. I tried different brands for a while and I found some benefit, but I haven't really gotten back to it. I need to when I have time to learn more about it and what it is that I'd like to do with it, if anything at all. But CBD oil did help me a little bit. Nutrition is extremely helpful for me. It's a very important part of my symptom management. And again, I don't have time to go into all the details of that. There's a big chunk of that in my book as well if you're interested in learning more. Resting, visualization, guided meditation, relaxation breathing, those things are also extremely helpful for me. And also doing quote unquote nothing without guilt. So what exactly is doing nothing? Well, doing nothing is a way of just letting go. And letting go is a hard process, or is kind of a hard thing to describe, but it's basically where you try and quiet your mind as much as you can and get your thinking mind out of the way. And that's why I included these quotes here. There's a quote from Winnie the Pooh where doing nothing often leads to the very best of something. And for me, I know when I close my computer lid and I turn off my phone and I go somewhere where I'm just with myself, I tend to reap more benefits from that than any other treatment that I do. But I also find it to be very, it's like active resting, because some of my best thoughts come to me. So I've written a lot of different things and I've done a lot of projects, and a lot of my ideas come when I pull back and do quote unquote nothing. And here's a quote that I love where it says, "Sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment." And what this is basically saying is get your thinking mind out of the way and be in awe of all of life. Basically, be like a child. Be in awe of a spider web, for example. Go out in nature. Nature, I think, teaches us many valuable lessons. And just be in awe of the things around us. And don't let your thinking mind judge people and things and events as much as we do. Just sell your cleverness, sell that thinking mind, get rid of it, get it out of the way, and purchase just nothingness and awe and bewilderment for what's around you. It's kind of a very meditative experience. I want to share this interesting fact with you about pain. I'm kind of going in a different direction here, but I don't want to leave this out. Neutral or positive sensory images or messages travel through the nervous system faster than painful messages. So, for example, soothing sensations can travel up to 7 times faster than sharp or burning pain. This is extremely important. So if we can involve ourselves with as many activities as possible that are positive sensory messages, they can actually reduce pain. And I put this in here at this point because part of that is doing nothing. And that nothingness is that meditative state that I was mentioning. And being in that state can actually create soothing experiences that compete with the slow, painful messages that will help to reduce pain. So as I said, this means that if soothing sensations and painful sensations reach the pain gate, so imagine at your brainstem there's a gate. If the soothing sensations beat the painful sensations to the pain gate, the pleasant ones move faster and they're going to prevail, which will block the slower painful ones and reduce our experience of pain. This is something that is an interesting thing to talk about, and some people will look at this and probably think I'm crazy for even saying this, but I think we need to learn to become friends with our dystonia, and we should not look at it as an adversary. Don't look at it as something outside of you, because it is a part of you. It's a part of us, and we have to learn to accept it like anything else about ourselves, be it certain features about us that we don't like or certain personality traits we don't like. We need to learn to be okay with some of these things, and dystonia is definitely one of them. So don't look at it as your adversary, because when we do that, we create anger. And when we create anger, it fuels adrenaline and a stress hormone called cortisol. When we have those ramped up in our body, it ramps up our symptoms. So we need to be very careful about how angry we are. And quite frankly, folks, no amount of anger will ever take your dystonia away or anything else in life. So be very careful of your emotional state of mind. And I believe that it's helpful that we stop fighting against dystonia. Because when we choose to stop being angry, we give our body a better chance to heal, because we create an internal environment of peace and harmony, which is the only state we can be in order for us to heal. Many of us talk about fighting dystonia, which I think is the wrong approach. I think the more we fight against it against dystonia and our symptoms, rather than working with it and accommodating it and changing our lifestyle, the more it controls us and the less peace and harmony we have. So instead of fighting against it, embrace it as a part of who you are, and then fight the desire to give up on yourself during these tough times. That to me is the real fight. And again, I know this is something that's maybe a very new concept for some of you, or maybe a lot of you. But this for me has been one of the most helpful things, among many others, of course, because the more I was fighting, the worse I was getting because the more it was controlling me and it was consuming my entire life. When I was able to let go and be okay with what was not okay, life began to get better. Here's a quote from my book. We can't change anything until we accept it, and we have to stop saying that life shouldn't be this way or that way. It should be this way because it is this way. We have to stop resisting what is, move forward, and do our best to make great things happen. Now, I just want to say that just because something is the way it is doesn't mean we can't change it, but we need to learn to accept it and then find ways, if we don't like it, to change it, but to not fight against what is. And here's an image of two people fighting. Now, when I look at this image, it kind of makes me uncomfortable because who likes confrontation? Now, some people do, of course, but not a lot of us. So why have this internal and this going on inside of our bodies and inside of our minds all the time? This is not a healthy way to live. So the fight that we have is not doing us any good. It's much better to have this visual and whatever it is that you may feel when you see this or whenever you're at the beach. And thankfully, I live near the ocean, so I can actually spend time in this environment, which I find to be very peaceful. I also find being in the mountains very peaceful. In fact, I used to live on this lake years ago, and I sometimes just close my eyes and I envision myself laying on a raft, floating around in this water and looking at these beautiful mountains. And this for me is very calming. I would much rather have this in my mind than those two people who were fighting. And this also is another kind of image I like to have, and something that I've actually begun doing in the past few years is photography. Not a whole lot, but I really like nature and nature photography, especially sunsets. And this is literally a mile from my house on a river nearby. And so I go down there and this is one of 4 or 5 different spots. I like to take sunset pictures. And this to me is just very peaceful, very calming, very relaxing, and very grounding for me. So I try and get out here as often as possible. And here's another picture up from the same spot from a different day with what I find to be some beautiful pictures. And I've actually made some canvas out of these, and I've had them printed, and now they're on my wall so I can enjoy them every single day. This, to me, is what we should be visualizing much more than the fighting. And as Nelson Mandela said, very profound, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. If you can learn how to work with what I, for many years, viewed as an enemy, which was dystonia, I viewed it as an enemy, and it just made my symptoms worse because of the change in my adrenaline and cortisol and all the stress hormones. When I learned to work with it and make peace with my dystonia and work towards acceptance, it became my partner in many ways in changing my life and doing a lot of different things I never thought I'd be doing and getting my life back on track. And so this has been extraordinarily helpful for me. And I wanted to say that the dystonia diagnosis, it is not the definition of our lives. It is not the book of our lives. It's a chapter. It's only one chapter. It may be a very big chapter, and it can alter the course of our lives from subtle to dramatic ways. It need not be how we define ourselves. It is not what happens to us in life that defines us. It is what we do with it that defines us. Very important. I want to reiterate that. It is not what happens to us in life that defines us. It is what we do with it that defines us, and that is what determines our character. So one of the main components to working with your dystonia, self-care. And I don't have time to go through all these different things, but I'm going to talk more about self-care in a moment. But self-care is something that a lot of us struggle with because we may feel guilty for taking care of ourselves and doing certain things that we feel sometimes we should be taking care of others more than we do ourselves, but we are just as important as anyone else. And so self-care is extremely important. Now, finding the many things that are involved in our unique personal self-care is kind of like fitting together the pieces to a puzzle, which is why it's hard for me to answer the question, what helps you most, because there are so many things, and a lot of them are self-care. So why is self-care so important? It gives us a greater sense of self-awareness of our needs. And with effective self-care, we can monitor our condition and make whatever physical, behavioral, social, and emotional changes that are necessary to maintain a high quality of life. We become more aware of the things we need, and we become aware of what helps us during those tough times. It's also extremely important because our doctors can only do so much for us. There is so much more to our overall well-being than just treatments. So the majority of care really must come from us. Our doctors, they don't eat for us, they don't sleep for us, they don't manage our stress, they don't choose our friends. They can encourage us and they can give us ideas, but ultimately it's up to us. And when we have increased self-care and we actually can see the benefits of it, it increases feelings of self-efficacy and confidence, which helps us gain more control. It's incredibly important to have control when we live with a condition where our body is moving involuntarily out of our control. So having some form of control is incredibly helpful, and so self-care is incredibly important. Self-care for me includes a lot of things: eating well, exercise, quality sleep, stress management, massage, acupuncture. Again, acupuncture is not something I'm doing, but I'm hoping to get back to it. Quieting my mind through meditation, prayer, and breathing exercises, listening to music, being out in nature, as I was talking about before, taking walks in the park, or basically anywhere, just kind of taking strolling walks and enjoying the peace and the quiet, and just, again, being out in nature. I like to rest by a pool or at the beach. I find those to be soothing places for me. It may be different for you, but find a place where you feel comfortable, where you can go and rest and let the world just sort of disappear if possible. And I also refrain from activities and events that overtax my body. I often will just shut off my computer and phone to take those mental breaks. I like to read inspirational books and just zone out watching my favorite movies and TV shows. I really try and not beat myself up for not being the person I once was and really embrace who I am now. And I talked about that earlier. This to me is extremely important, I believe, for accepting and moving on. And I avoid toxic people and spend time with people who lift me up. And I share with you, before, a lot of who those people were. We need to be with those that bring out the best in you, not the stress in you. And it is absolutely not at all selfish to take care of yourself. Saying no is a big part of that. So many of us struggle with that. I know how hard it is to say no, but we need to be okay with the fact that we can't do everything and we can't please everyone. When we are able to set boundaries and give more to ourselves, we can give a better version of ourselves to others. Because people get the best of you when you give yourself the best of you. Now, if you struggle with self-care, perhaps think of it in this mindset. Treat yourself like someone else you are responsible for taking care of. For many of us, we are often more apt to help people out that we are responsible for, and just taking care of others is kind of our nature for many of us. We need to try and treat ourselves like someone else that we're responsible for. Give the same care that you would give a loved one, because you deserve it just as much as they do. And quite frankly, your loved ones want you to do everything for yourself to make sure that you are the best version of yourself. So here's some daily coping strategies. Live for today, one day at a time, not in the past or the future. Do your best to learn about your condition so you can make good choices for how to treat it. Treat your problems as challenges to overcome versus something that is destroying your life. If you look at it from this perspective, we become more open to possibilities. Do your best to reject why me questioning. This just puts us in a kind of a pity party state. And it's okay to go to that place, but if we live in that pity party state of mind all the time, it can be very damaging and cause a lot of anxiety and depression. And so a better question is oftentimes, why not me? I mean, I'm no better than anybody else. So, I developed this. What am I going to do with this? Am I going to let it define my life, or am I going to define it, for lack of a better way to describe it? So be very careful about this why me questioning. Incorporate stress reduction activities into your daily routine, and please, please be willing to ask for help. A lot of us struggle asking for help, but people want to help. We love to help people, and it's a gift that we give others to allow them to help us. So be willing to ask for help. Also engage in random acts of kindness. I talked about this earlier about how that can increase the feel-good hormones. Allow flexibility and extra time in your plans. A lot of us need rest periods before we go and do things and a rest period afterwards. And sometimes we need to cancel something that we had planned. And it's okay to do that. Everybody does. It's not just people that are living with this particular condition. So be flexible with yourself. Do the most difficult tasks at the time of the day when you feel your best, and try and not, I left a word out here, but try and not push the boundaries too much beyond your limits. And recognize that your capacities may vary. So what is possible one day may not be another. Here are some additional coping strategies. Engage in activities that give you a feeling of accomplishment. Avoid too much isolation. Get involved with the dystonia community, because this is a place where you can share your experiences with others and also learn from them. Don't argue about things that are not productive. Be very careful about your interactions with other people. It can really help us or hurt us. As I mentioned before, get outdoors and spend time surrounded by nature if you're able to. Try and keep busy learning new things. If we keep our mind active, that can help to reduce and minimize our symptoms and our pain, and help us sort of forget at least a little bit of the suffering that we're experiencing. And exercise if you can. Exercise is a great way to stay healthy and also maintain, to actually help to reduce pain. But make sure you modify whatever it is to accommodate your symptoms. And learn how to say no without guilt. I know we talked about this earlier, but we need to set proper boundaries for ourselves, appropriate boundaries, so that we don't overextend ourselves and make our symptoms worse. And please don't judge yourself for what you can't do, and please, please acknowledge yourself for what you do get done. And I'm sure we do a lot more than we give ourselves credit, and some days we may not even feel well enough to get out of bed in the morning. And if that's all you do, then acknowledge yourself for even thinking about getting out of bed, let alone getting out of bed. And whatever you do thereafter, acknowledge yourself for everything that you've gotten done. Because really, ultimately, we make a life out of what we have, not what we are missing. We have to focus on what we have and our capabilities, and try and let go of the limitations. We need to honor our efforts. Even if I'm in pain and there's something that's difficult to do, I take pride in that effort, knowing I did my best. And this is something that we all need to acknowledge in ourselves, rather than beating up ourselves for things that we can no longer do. That doesn't serve us any purpose whatsoever. And finding happiness is really ultimately what we all want, and it really isn't a state so much as it is a skill. It's a skill of knowing how to take what life throws your way and making the most of it. Our happiness can sometimes be impacted by the opinion of others. So many of us are judged by others who just simply don't understand what it's like to live with dystonia or any other kind of a chronic condition or pain or whatever it might be. We have to be careful about how we allow their opinions to impact us. I don't think people really mean, some people are just, they mean to be harmful, but I don't think most people are. They try and be helpful and encouraging, and they just don't realize that they often miss the mark with things that they're saying. But ultimately, our happiness is not determined by, it's determined by us, as mentioned in the previous quote, and not so much what people think of us. But I do want to talk about what some of those things are because they happen to a lot of us, if not all of us. So the opinion of others, things like it's all in your head, you're just having a bad day, there are people worse off than you, everybody gets tired. I'm sure as I'm saying these, you're probably nodding your head like, yeah, I've heard that one before. You're just depressed. You just have to tough it out. Maybe if you just got out more, it really can't be that bad. Maybe if you just exercise more. Now, I think all these things are good ideas, good suggestions, good things for us, but they really don't hit the mark with what it is that we are actually experiencing. And most people say these things from their own perspective based on their own experiences in life. It is not based on you. It is based on how they have gotten themselves out of, or what they think are effective ways of getting yourself out of a difficult situation. It is a misunderstanding of what needs to be done given your situation that is not in the context of what they've experienced. And so these are judgments that are really things we need to try and be careful of embracing too much, because people say them without really understanding what they're really saying. We have to let go of the opinion of others. This helped me because I was really distraught over things people thought about me and said about me when I was really struggling. And even now, at times I feel like I'm maybe not doing enough, and I kill myself to do a lot of things that I do, and I really feel I accomplish a lot oftentimes. But I struggled for years letting others' judgments affect me. And so someone shared this quote with me: the best understanding that we will ever have is that we will never be fully understood. And even everybody listening to this, if you have, let's say everyone with dystonia listening to this program right now, even all of us will never fully understand what another person with dystonia is going through. We may understand a lot of it, but we never really understand how it impacts our lives and the dynamics of everything that goes along with it. So the best understanding is that we will never be fully understood. And we need to be careful and put ourselves in a position of power to not accept a lot of those labels that people put on us, like lazy, mental, apathetic, sympathy-seeking, hypochondriac, and whatever thoughtless comments people make that are associated with the chronic condition. We need to also be really careful to not label ourselves either. A lot of us do that, and we have to be very careful to not do that. That's a form of beating ourselves up that is not doing us any good. We need to wear our challenges as armor, not as shackles. We have to realize that not everyone will understand your journey, which is totally fine because it's not their journey to make sense of, it is yours. And this all comes down to our emotional health. Every feeling we have will affect some part of our body. So even if we're doing everything right, whatever it might be right for us, for me, exercising, eating and sleeping well, managing stress, etc., etc. Now, even if I'm doing all those things, if my emotions are not in check, it's going to affect how I feel physically. And this includes how we respond to all life events and our interactions with people. So negative emotions will negatively affect our health. And to achieve emotional balance, it's necessary to uncover and express those emotions. There's nothing wrong with any of these emotions at all, but if we're always angry and we're living in constant resentment and bitterness and shame and fear, it's going to have a negative toll on the body. We need to learn to experience and express those emotions, let them go, and then try and replace them as often as we can with forgiveness, love, joy, and hope. And affirmations can be very helpful in this regard. And I'm going to share with you one of mine that I came up with that I find very helpful. I picked this because these are three areas that, to me, are kind of like the triangle of health: the mind, the body, and the spirit, or the heart. So I like to say, my mind is clear and calm. My body is balanced and strong. My heart is loving and pure. This, to me, hits all the areas that I need, and I will say this sometimes 25, 50 times over and over and over, depending on how I feel, depending on what I need in the moment. Sometimes I will pick just one of them, like the first one: my mind is clear and calm. I have a racing mind, and I need to tell myself to relax. I need to be in an environment where I'm relaxed, and then just say over and over, my mind is clear, and visualize a clear, calm mind. And then my body, I want my body to be balanced. I want my muscles from dystonia to be balanced, and I want it to be a strong, healthy body. So I focus on my body being balanced and strong. And I want my heart to be loving and pure and kind and caring and giving. And so I focus on that aspect of myself as well. This is a quote that I have on my desk, and it's about learning to let go and just be. Remember, we are human beings, not human doings. I know that that's probably something many of you have heard before, and it's so true. We want to just go, 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 and oftentimes it's best to just do, again, quote unquote, nothing and just be. And sometimes we have to stop trying to figure everything out and just let go. And this is something that I read that's sitting on my desk, and I look at it whenever I need it. Let go of what has happened. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax right now and rest. This is something that we all, no matter who we are in life, need to do. But especially if we live with a chronic health condition like we do with dystonia, we have to relax and rest our bodies and our minds. Critical. If you deal with anxiety and fear and panic and not being able to let go, this is a great program. It's called Path Through Panic by Dr. Claire Weeks. It's a 2 CD program. Very, very good information, very helpful information. She's also written a book. The book she's written is called Hope and Help for Your Nerves. That kind of goes in conjunction with that. And if you're interested in learning about mindfulness and meditation, this is a great program as well by Jon Kabat-Zinn called Mindfulness for Beginners. It's a CD program, and it discusses what mindfulness is in a very easy to understand way, and also has various mindfulness meditation activities. So, dystonia, is it a blessing or a curse? Now, I'm sure this is going to get a lot of quizzical looks. For many years, I looked at it as an absolute curse and this evil intruder that came in and destroyed my life. And now I look at it in many ways as a blessing. And there are many reasons why that is the case. Because I have learned so much from dystonia. Perseverance, patience, and I'm still learning all of these. It's not like I've conquered anything. I'm still battling here. But I've learned perseverance, patience, compassion, courage, strength in many, many ways, humility, a never give up attitude, and with every obstacle in life, there comes an opportunity. And I try and look at dystonia in many ways as a gift, and not about how it's ruining my life, but how it's reshaping my life. Now, all those qualities I mentioned previously, I've had them before. I've always had them. They're just far more prominent in my life, and they're much stronger in my life now. And so it's reshaped me in ways that have been rather profound. All of these lessons, they've given me meaning and purpose in my life, which is incredibly important. Because without meaning and purpose, suffering of any kind will not end. We need to find meaning and purpose to our lives and never stop looking. It is critical. It is the key component to end or reduce suffering. I want in my life, I want to inspire people. I want someone to look at me and say, because of you, Tom, I didn't give up. So how have I found meaning and purpose in my life? I do that through writing and speaking. I write a lot of articles. I've written a book. I'm doing life coaching, helping people with their challenges in life. I'm also involved with supportive relationships and helping others, doing creative projects, and every day setting attainable goals where I can feel a sense of accomplishment. These things give me meaning and purpose. This is the book that I mentioned. It's called Diagnosis Dystonia: Navigating the Journey. Some of you who are listening may have this book, and if you don't have it, I highly encourage you to get a copy of this. It was actually recognized by the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and they put it on their list of suggested books and resources. And it's the only book on dystonia that they have there, so I'm very, very proud of that. And it's also been featured in a lot of other print and online magazines. And I just hope you take a look at it. It's been a helpful resource for so many people. It's not just for it's for anyone with dystonia, but it's also for our loved ones and our doctors. It contains my story as well as information about all aspects of dystonia, some of which I've talked about here, but the book contains 10 to 20 to 50 times more than what it is that I've been talking about in this presentation today. The majority of the book is about day-to-day living with dystonia and other chronic conditions. It's not a book that's going to give you a cure of any kind. It's a way to help you learn how to live as well as possible with dystonia. So I want to share with you some of the book topics in case you're interested. It has coping strategies for dealing with pain, anger, fear, depression, anxiety, stress, grief, relationships, shame, and all of this stuff is referenced. It's not just my opinion. There's all referenced information in here. It also contains healthy lifestyle strategies, pain management, strategies to help you learn to accept and rebuild your life, tips for dealing with the public and how to talk about dystonia, which is a very difficult thing for many of us. It also provides tips for dealing with the diagnosis and the symptoms and the life changes that come about and how to learn to modify and live a fulfilling life. I also discuss effective doctor visits and what to expect at your botulinum toxin injection appointments, as well as just in general what to expect at various appointments. Because this is a scary thing for a lot of us. And so I provide information in there that will be a roadmap to get you through all the different things you will be experiencing. I also discuss pretty much all the treatments that are out there and the therapies and various medications, the work environment and the disability process, tips and tricks for doing daily activities with more ease. I cover basically everything we do from the moment we get up until we go to bed at night. I also include a lot of patient testimonials for a lot of different perspectives from other people as well, so it's not just coming from me. I want to share a couple real quick book reviews. This book has really helped me find new and different ways of coping and handling dystonia. What I really like is how Tom never says my way is the only way. He gives so many different avenues that I never even considered before reading this book. Now I have a role model that encourages me to continue on no matter what tricks dystonia has up its sleeve for me on any given day. This is an essential read, not just for dystonia sufferers and their friends and families, but for anyone struggling with any kind of ongoing mental or physical illness or disability. Everyone on the planet with dystonia or any other chronic illness, or anyone for that matter who is struggling with life, needs to add this book to their arsenal. I want to just mention that even though the title says Diagnosis Dystonia, if you replace any other life challenge, be it physical, be it health or something else, the information in there is applicable to anyone. And this last one, this should be the resource book for dystonia for many years to come. I also want to share with you various places I've had articles published, and I'm only sharing this not to say, hey, look at me and look what I've done, and well, I kind of am, but for a particular reason. I've been published in a couple of these things several times. Patient Worthy, I've been published over 20 times. The Mighty, over 15 times. National Pain Report, a handful of times. The Wellness Universe, a few times. The reason I'm putting these up here is because this is one of the things that gives me meaning and purpose, because it gives me the opportunity to educate and make people aware of dystonia, chronic pain, and chronic illness, and raise more awareness, and also try and help myself process a lot of the things that I have experienced. And so it has many pronged benefits for me. But I'm sharing all of these things that I've done because I want you to remember from the beginning of the program when I was showing you the suffering I was going through for so many years when I lived on my floor and could do nothing. So here's a guy who went from this right here, where I was in so much pain, I was having trouble speaking because I was gasping for breath, and I went through all of these variations of dystonia, and I gained all this weight to where I was literally in this picture probably a week or two away from a stroke or a heart attack, to writing a book, to speaking to many different organizations and groups, podcasts, etc., writing all those articles. So I've created a life for myself out of what basically at this point in time I wanted to die. And so I'm sharing all this because I want to hopefully give you some hope that just even if you're completely at your wit's end and want everything to end, don't give up, because you can make a life for yourself, which is what I'm continuing to try and do. And it's not the life that I thought it was, but it's so much better than this thing you're looking at right now, this person you're looking at right now, who was suffering so immensely, and you don't see it in the picture. So the picture is not speaking 1,000 words. There are many words behind the image that were horrible. In fact, this is like a different life that I have now compared to this person I'm looking at. So I've worked really hard to rebuild my life in many ways and accomplish things, and I want to keep going and going and going until I can't anymore. And I just want to encourage you to do what you can within your range of abilities to try and find what you find meaningful and purposeful in your life, and realize that a person can actually accomplish a whole lot even when they are at their worst. They can get out of it and do things. So again, I went from that person who was brutally suffering to this person who is living a very happy, fulfilling life now. I still struggle. I still have pain and other symptoms, and it's still a challenge every day, but I am getting better every day, and that's really the way that we should look at ourselves, is just taking those steps every single day towards what it is that we want to become. If you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, there's 3 websites here. It's actually the same website, just different pages on my website. So diagnosisdystonia.com, tomseamancoaching.com, and dystonialiving.com. I want to end this program with this little story that I really, really like a lot. It's a story about a pencil maker, and after the pencil maker made the pencil, he put the pencil in the box and he gave it 5 important lessons for life. Number 1, everything you do in life will leave a mark. Number 2, you can always correct the mistakes that you made. What is most important is what's inside of you. You will undergo painful sharpenings which will only make you better. Dystonia, chronic pain, chronic illness, very painful sharpenings. And I promise they're going to make you, if they haven't already, they're going to make you better. Number 5, to be the best pencil, you must allow yourself to be held and guided by the hand that holds you. This is of course open to interpretation. This may be just basically what this is saying to me is to have faith in whatever it is that you believe in, be it yourself or a higher being, and allow yourself to just be held and guided, that even if you're suffering, you're on the right path, you're on the right track, and everything and everyone is exactly where they're supposed to be at this very moment. And there's a meaning and there's a reason for it. And if we can just believe that, good things are going to happen to us. So this story teaches us that we are a special person with unique talents and abilities, and only we can fulfill the purpose for which we were born. Never ever allow yourself to think that your life is insignificant and cannot be changed. Just like the pencil, always remember that the most important part of you is what is inside of you. You do enough, you have enough, and you are enough. And if you ever think you are too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. Remember that every single step toward your goal is just as important as the goal itself. And even the goal is not the end. It is the first step towards your next goal. So never give up and never ever stop climbing. And remember that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. That's all it takes, is one tiny baby step in the direction of our dreams, in the direction of our healing, in the direction of whatever it is you want to walk towards. It begins with that one step, and it doesn't matter how big that step is. We just need to make that step. And which step have you reached today? This is a cute little cartoon that I like, but for many years I was at the bottom where I said I won't do it, I can't do it. And then I was like, well, I want to, but I don't know how. How am I going to do it? And then I think, well, I'll try. And then I realized I could. and then I say, I'm going to now. I made the decision that I'm going to change and I'm going to do things differently to improve my life. And I get to that top step, and yay, I did it. And that top step is the first step towards the next goal that you want to reach. So always believe in yourself and never give up, always trusting the strength that you have within. Because you are stronger than you think. Please, please don't ever lose hope. Don't ever give up, because the day after we give up might be the day that our life changes. So every single day, strap on your helmet and never give up. Thank you all so much. Health and happiness to everyone.